When I was putting my thoughts together for this, I had to try really hard not to start this off with some overly clickbaity, dramatic statement or like a shot of somebody laying on the floor in the fetal position. Because let me tell you, after reading this, it was tempting. Anyway, on this channel, I do all kinds of things, mixtures of walkthroughs and read-throughs and videos dedicated to entire series or just bits of series, all kinds of things. And I had the idea before I even started this manga that this manga just might be more suited to a full series review instead of like a walkthrough. And then about halfway through the first volume, I realized there's no way I'm doing a walkthrough for this. Like, it's just not physically possible. And then at the end of the day, when I finished it, I had a whole nother problem. What the fuck do you say about this? Where do you even start? So at the end of the day, this isn't going to be a walkthrough per se, and it definitely isn't going to be the definitive video on Goodnight Punpun. That would just frankly be too difficult, and I'm probably not even qualified to do that video in the first place. I guess at the end of the day, I'm really just a guy who read a thing, and I kind of just want to talk about it. Now, before we get started, I do want to say thank you to my patrons. And I also want to say that there definitely will be an uncensored version of this up on my Patreon, just because I am pretty sure that there are definitely going to be some panels that I absolutely have to censor for this video. This manga is insane. Although I don't even know what I'll actually include in the video, let alone the uncensored version. I haven't made it that far yet, but I mean, I might just leave a lot of this out. I've even for the uncensored version, I just don't know how much I really feel like putting on the screen, just because it does get so extremely dark. Also, speaking of this being extremely dark, I do want to go ahead and give a trigger warning for this entire video, because I will be bringing up a large list of just things that are very triggering. So if you are sensitive in any way to anything that you see here, you might not be comfortable watching this video, or definitely don't read this manga. It was very tough to get through at times. Also, as I just mentioned, I will be discussing this entire manga all the way through, so consider this now your spoiler warning for the video, and if you haven't read it, I wouldn't recommend watching this video either. Now, meet Punpun. Punpun is a boy and the main character of our story, and for the most part he's going to be drawn as this weird little cartoon character of a bird or something. And you hear it repeated a lot that he's drawn this way because it makes it easier for you to identify with him as a character, or to see yourself in him as a character. Instead of giving him a face, then anyone can identify with Punpun because he's not actually drawn as a real person. And this is a typical device that authors use in their stories sometimes to make the characters to be more relatable. Like in the video game Halo, Master Chief never takes off his helmet, so anybody can pretend that they are the person underneath the helmet because we don't actually see his face. Makes it easier for you to pretend you're him. But in the case of Punpun, I found it to be a lot more than that, because it gave the author the freedom to draw Punpun in different ways and draw him as an outcast, literally outcast from the art itself, and then was able to fluctuate his appearance based on his mood and everything else. And actually, if you take it back to the initial thing that I have been told and I have read, that it is so that you can insert yourself into it, I actually found that not to be the case, because the way he was drawn and just how cartoony and the bird-like nature of him is so drastically different than what a human actually is or can be. I actually found it prohibitive in the sense that it made it harder for me to identify with Punpun and kind of put myself in his position, because he was drawn so drastically different. So I don't think either it wasn't meant for you to be able to put yourself in his shoes, or it just failed with me, because I literally found it to be harder to identify with him because of the way he was drawn. Although in the sense of being able to illustrate him and his fluctuating thoughts and moods and feelings, it was a success, in my opinion. Also, speaking of the art style in general here, I do want to take a minute to note just how phenomenal the art is in this. It is amazing. It is just some of the shots where it stops, the level of attention to detail, just the detail in general was astonishing. And I have read some stuff like Vagabond and Berserk, and so to get some of these shots, I mean, it was just, you would have to stop for a second and be like, dude, what the fuck are you even doing right now? This is insane. It's very good, utterly impressive. Well, one of the most impressive visually, artistically, that I have seen. And then he's going to use that to do some bad things to you as it goes on, let me tell you. Anyway, we're going to follow Punpun through his life, starting in, I believe it's elementary school, and going all the way up into his 20s. And it starts with an exchange student entering the school, and her name is Aiko. And this will trigger an unhealthy obsession that Punpun will have with Aiko, and it will reverberate through the entire rest of the story. Back at Punpun's house, we realize that Punpun is growing up in an abusive household. His father is maybe abusive towards his mom, and his mom is definitely abusive towards him. And then pretty much right off the bat, his parents get into a fight. His dad hits his mom and is taken away. And it's left real ambiguous in the beginning as to whether or not his dad actually did hit his mom or not. But later on in the story, we do realize that yes, he actually did. But the reason that he did it was because that she was having like this mental breakdown and was threatening to kill both herself and Punpun. Also, while his mom's recovering from this particular incident in the hospital, she attempts suicide while she's in the hospital. So it's just a real happy, healthy family at this point. Then after Punpun's father leaves, his uncle moves in and he brings his whole host of mental problems with him. For the most part, there isn't a character in this entire manga that isn't completely f***ed up. Anyway, this particular section has a strong focus on Punpun in school, and he makes some friends, and those friends bond, mostly over attempting to find and watch porn. They eventually do, and that leads them on some weird adventure to go find a murder scene. It all feels relatively normal, kind of run-of-the-mill, coming-of-age group of friend boy stuff, other than the fact that it feels like it just has this unrelenting focus on the negative. It's just such a pessimistic viewpoint that we are seeing this story through the lens of, and I will circle back to that later on in the video. Also, it's kind of funny that you notice right off the bat in Volume 1 just how terrible and the focus on the negative this is, and you're like, oh my gosh, why is this just so unrelentingly negative? And boy, let me tell you, I had no idea how much worse this was gonna get. And I'm not even kidding when I say once you get to the end of this and you look back on Volume 1, it feels almost like looking back on the good old days. And when you consider that when you were reading those good old days, all you felt was, why is this so awful? That's fucked. Anyway, in the next section, Punpun's going to enter middle school, and now Aiko's there too. But now she's got herself a boyfriend, and it's not Punpun, and he's not happy, and it's going to bother him. And it's all pretty relatively normal life stuff, and actually, it's portrayed relatively normally. And in this middle school section, we are going to take some pretty large detours in the story department, following other characters that aren't Punpun, even though this is his story. We get some pretty large sections with the uncle, and we get his backstory and his current relationship with Midori, who is an extremely emotionally unstable person with some severe attachment issues, that's for sure. We also get a flashback for the uncle to a previous inappropriate relationship that he had with a 16-year-old girl when he was like a full-ass grown adult, which is... Here, that's illegal. In the United States where I live, that shit's illegal. I think for some reason it might be legal in Japan, which why they allow that, I am not entirely sure. But here, that shit's illegal. Anyway, at the very least, it's morally questionable. Let's just say that. Also, this little 16-year-old girl that the uncle has an inappropriate relationship with has this particular prayer that she likes to say, and it is, dear God, tinkle hoy. Which is the prayer that Punpun says repeatedly over and over again because his uncle taught it to him. So the uncle got this from a 16-year-old girl that he was having relations with and taught it to his nephew so he could say it. what the fuck? We'll also get quite a bit about his mom and her relationships and just her mental problems in general. Pretty much everybody in this story is extremely mentally unstable, especially inside of Punpun's family, and all of the characters seem to have unhealthy sex lives, or strange obsessions with sex, or just an unhealthy view of it in general. As a whole, the entirety of this manga, the emphasis on abuse and unhealthy sex is really unrelenting. By the time Punpun reaches high school, his mother's behavior just continues to get worse. His uncle falls into a deep, dark depression and ends up running away from the family. And his uncle's girlfriend, Midori, being upset and lonely because the uncle has left, goes to, in a way, take comfort with Punpun, and in the process ends up raping him. And then the story just moves on. It's never addressed. It's never properly acknowledged what just happened here. It just kind of like moves. Later on, you will get a scene where the uncle comes up to him and says, you know, I heard what happened between you and Midori. I just wanted you to know I'm not upset. Like, with who? What the fuck are you even talking about? Who are you not upset with? Because you sure as fuck should be. And what the fuck is, like, it was so upsetting to me that this was not acknowledged, that this was a thing, and this was not good, right? And then towards the end of the manga, when Punpun is like recounting in his mind the loves of his life, Midori and Aiko and some other girl are the people that flash in his mind. I know that, granted, at the scene that it takes place in is in the context of a sexual encounter that he is having at that point in time, but Aiko is included in the group of people, and at that point in time he hadn't had sex with Aiko, but he had with Midori. So it seems more like just the loves of his life that he's flashing through, and he lists Midori as one of them in his mind, which is fucked. Like, he is a child. She takes advantage of him. She takes his virginity. She rapes him, and he still has a flash of her in his mind later in life, like, oh, Midori. What? Like, he doesn't even understand what happened to him and the levels of how wrong that is of what happened to him. And this is probably, I know I'm going on a little bit of a rant here, this is, other than one other thing later that happens, the darkest thing that happens in the entire manga. And this one was especially dark because not only is it ignored in the entire story by every single character in the story, it's ignored by the story itself. I was like, this is going to come back. There's going to be something. Something's going to happen because of this. Nope. It just happens, and the story itself treats it as though it's just not an important thing. And I think that's probably the most upsetting thing about it. Like, I mean, for example, let's just flip the genders here. If you had like a little 16-year-old, I don't even know how old he is in this, 15 or 16-year-old girl, and her uncle came in and did that to her, and then just rolled out, and the aunt came back later and was like, it's okay, I know what you and your uncle did, don't worry about it, you're fine, I'm not mad. This would be viewed differently. It would be viewed very differently. Like, it's just the levels of wrong that just took place in here, the worst, other than one other thing that happens later. Anyway, almost immediately after this, his mother is diagnosed with cancer and she dies. After she dies, Punpun's dad's going to offer to let him come and live with him, but Punpun says no, and he ends up going out and getting his own apartment and living by himself. And it's during this time in the story that he actually is free of all of his childhood influences and everything like that, and actually has the freedom to kind of move in a new direction in his life. But due to everything that happened to him in his childhood and all of his other traumas and everything that happened to him, and all of that being completely unresolved, he ends up seeing Aiko and then sets some really unrealistic goal of, I have exactly 2 years to fix myself and be happy, or find her, or I'll just commit suicide. Even though they barely even know each other at all. Like, they held hands once. I mean, they were friends for a little while, but really, they don't even know each other. And to be quite honest, at this point in the story, I was like, I hope they never find each other. I hope he never finds her, because he is so f***ed at this point, so mentally f***ed up, and she actually appears to be pretty well put together. And at that point, I thought, you know, any interaction that he's going to have with a healthy individual is going to just end badly and possibly run the risk of damaging the healthy person in that scenario because he's so fucked up. You know, and it's just, I just thought, you know, at this point it would be best if they just didn't meet. And they don't yet, but in the meantime, he does meet up with an older girl that he met previously when he tried to go out on this date with this chick that he completely lied to, made up this whole fake persona about who he was so that he would appear attractive to her, which ends very badly when he actually starts to act like himself, because, you know, that was going to work. But he ends up running back into this artist and mangaka chick, and he ends up in a relationship with her. But it's not a real relationship, and they won't call it a relationship. They call it a friendship because they won't date, but they do have sex. It's very strange. And this girl has, you guessed it, a very unhealthy relationship with sex. And I was very conflicted about this relationship because, like I said, I didn't really want him to be with Aiko, but then this girl comes along and now he's kind of with her, and I was conflicted because she seems like a nice enough girl, but then she treats him very badly and essentially just uses him for sex. And then her personality and her character is constantly compared to that of his mother, which is just a massive red flag. So like I said, I didn't want him to find Aiko because I felt like that was just a bad pairing and that shouldn't happen in the story. And now he's paired over here with this girl, and this feels like a bad pairing and this shouldn't happen. So at this point, I've just decided Punpun should date nobody. He should not be with any other human being on the face of the planet currently because he's too damaged. What he should probably do is he should just go seek out a therapist, enter himself into therapy, do some good year or two worth of therapy, do some real hard soul searching, some work on himself, fix himself up, and then he can go out into the world and he can start a nice, healthy relationship, having solved some of his inner turmoil and problems. And of course, this is exactly what happens. Just kidding. This doesn't happen. Now, all joking aside, this section of the manga actually feels like we're starting to get somewhere. Like, he's living on his own. He's paying all of his bills. He's helping that little friend, the mangaka, write a manga. He's getting his realtor's license, and he's making some real legitimate friends who are actually friends with him for who he really is and not some bullshit made up story that he's told him about himself just so that they would think better of him. No, it's like actual people that know him and just chose to be friends with him. I mean, they're all pretty much terrible people in one way, shape, or another, but it's starting to feel like real progress. So when his lease is up and he thinks back on that 2 years ago, I told myself if nothing in my life had changed, I'd kill myself, and nothing's changed, so I should probably just kill myself. And he falls back into a deep, dark depression. I'm like, whoa, dude, take a step back. Take inventory of your life. This is the best it's ever been, dude. Like, for real. I just laid it out for you. What are you talking about? Nothing's changed. I should probably just kill myself. And I understand that that's not how depression works, that, you know, your mind is going to snap to the worst possible scenario at that point in time, and you will fall back into your depression. But this is exactly why you should step back and take an inventory when that depression hits, because you will get in this deep funk. Go, oh my gosh, my life still sucks. That's why you take that step back and you go, wait, no, I'm good, actually. I was seeing this all f***ed up. Anyway, Punpun ends up falling back into a deep, dark depression and running into Aiko, which just feels like the worst timing ever. And at the same time, it's just a really tense moment. And it's not tense because of, oh, will they, won't they kind of tension. It's a tension because this can't possibly end well. And it basically gets royally f***ed up right from the start. And that whole thing that I was feeling about Punpun and, oh no, this isn't going to go well because Punpun's such a f***ed up person and Aiko looks pretty well put together and he's just going to damage Aiko by the nature of how awful his being is. Let's just say that I was wrong, and that is not how this plays out. I mean, yes, he is super fucked up, and he is responsible for half of everything that's going to happen from here on out. But let's back up just 1 second, because I'm starting to get ahead of myself. Now, speaking of Aiko, she still lives with her mother, and we know from earlier in the manga that her mom is a member of a cult. I just haven't mentioned it yet. And speaking of cults, cults play a big role in this manga in general, considering the fact that her mom is in a cult, and we've also been seeing this Good Vibrations cult slowly build up and grow and gain popularity and momentum in the background of this manga pretty much from the beginning all the way through. So much so that the leader of this cult ends up like running for mayor of Tokyo, and one of the original friends from that friend group from the elementary school, the one with the runny nose, ends up joining this cult. Also, the cult that Aiko's mom is a member of and the Good Vibrations cult were created by two different men, but they were from the same family. So they're literally related, the two cults. I have no idea if that's important or if that's supposed to mean anything, but it's a thing. Anyway, back with Aiko and her mom. Her mom is abusive and pretends to be handicapped so that Aiko will stay home and take care of her, all the while she is mentally, emotionally, and physically abusing Aiko for her entire life. And it gets to the point where when Punpun shows up to even speak with the mom goes completely crazy, attacks both of them, stabbing Aiko. And this escalates to the point where Punpun ends up choking the mom and Aiko ends up stabbing her, and they have officially killed Aiko's mother. And that escalated very quickly. And this is where the manga takes a turn for the dark. And if you thought it was already dark, like I did, just wait. Actually, for the rest of this, which is like 3 entire volumes or 1.5 of these big chunky things, you just get this kind of like sick feeling in your gut as you read through it. It's kind of like that same sick feeling that you get from watching the third act of Requiem for a Dream. If you've ever seen that movie, it's very reminiscent of that, at least that feeling that you get in your gut. It's that downward spiral as the characters detach from reality and slowly just degrade in mind and body and spirit as it goes on. Descending so far into despair, you will literally feel sick. I am not exaggerating. I mean, for example, when Aiko goes to gouge out Punpun's eye to prove that there's trust between the two of them, or when Punpun attempts to strangle Aiko because he's going to kill her and then commit suicide because he thinks that that's the right thing to do. It's just unrelenting. Like, there are scenes where Aiko wets the bed because her wounds that have not been properly dealt with or properly taken to a hospital are getting worse, and it's causing her body to just malfunction while they're continuing to be basically sexually active in one way or another. It's really rough. Like, really rough to get through. And then, by far, above and away, everything else in this, you hit the scene where Aiko hangs herself while Punpun is sleeping. And when Punpun finds her, he is so distraught, he can't even mentally come to terms with what just happened. He gets her down, and he spends, I don't even know how many pages, carrying around her dead body while talking to her and having entire conversations about how their life is going to be and what's going to happen now. And you know, Aiko, I've been thinking that from now on our lives should be this XYZ, and he starts fantasizing about how they'll have arguments and he'll come home from work, and it's a kick in the gut, the whole page after page after page of him carrying around a dead body and talking to it because he is just completely and utterly disconnected from reality at this point in time. He is so traumatized that he cannot grasp what is happening in his life. It is on a whole nother level. Eventually, he leaves the body behind and comes back, and somebody has taken it away. And he will, at this point, attempt to commit suicide himself and fail. At which point, he's found by his friend, that mangaka, and is taken to the hospital where he's actually patched up. And actually, from the hospital, he's taken off and has to serve probation for the part that he played in the death of Aiko's mother. And actually, at this point, we get this massive release of tension because the story ends up, believe it or not, going back kind of to baseline. I mean, if you can even call it that. I mean, if you were going to track the trajectory of this manga, it would be, it started set a depressing, bad life, and then you slowly move down until you get to your, I don't know, move out age, where you kind of get this little boost and you move up to just a normal bad life with a normal bad girlfriend. And then you meet Aiko and you take a swift walk straight off a fucking cliff until you hit rock bottom. And then we just kind of pop back up to, you know, a normal bad life with that normal bad girlfriend who kind of acts like your mom. So, baseline. And with as shitty of a life as Punpun has had this entire time, and knowing that he just went back to his shitty life and his shitty life is going to continue to be shitty, it still somehow feels like a happy ending. How fucked up is that? Or at the very least, the happiest ending this book's ever going to give you, and actually, it could have been infinitely worse. By the time we get to the places this is going to take you, and then it pops you back up to, but he kind of comes out of it and he gets to go back to dating that piece of crap mangaka. You're like, oh my God, this is great. You know, like this is, I don't know. And if you compare this to other stories similar to this, like that Requiem for a Dream that I was talking about, this essentially is a happy ending if you compare it to that shit. And it's just terrible because I said in the beginning that this story felt like it was just wanted to be relentlessly negative. And when we get back to that baseline relentlessly negative, it feels like a good thing, which is awful. Now, speaking of that relentless negativity that I was talking about, and I mentioned earlier, I said I'd circle back around to it. It feels like a matter of perspective. As I went on, I realized this. I didn't notice it at first, but I realized it kind of as the story goes on, especially at the end, it really snaps into focus for you. And I think he draws attention to it on purpose, but I don't know why. And that's when we see the lives of everybody in the story through the lens of a normal character, that normal character being the one friend from the friend group that moved away after elementary school. And he moves back and we kind of get to see the world through his eyes for a second, and he sees everything normally. And we haven't seen anything normally the entire manga. So it's kind of jarring. And it's at that point, well, I kind of noticed a little earlier, but it's at that point where it becomes just aggressively clear that we have been seeing this through a very specific lens the entire time, and that is a very negative lens. Even the focus is on the negative and only the negative. Anything that happens that we see, that we follow all of our characters as they descend downwards, as they go into depressions, as bad things happen, as they focus on the negative. Anytime anything even remotely positive happens, it happens off screen. When the uncle descends into his depression, we see it. But when he comes back up to baseline for himself and he kind of digs himself out of it and kind of comes around, that happens off screen. We don't get to see him come to terms with his problems and kind of come back up to a functional level. We only get to see him go down. So it's a very specific perspective, which is only bad. We don't get to see anything good happen. There are good things that happen, or at least people overcoming problems and stuff like that, but they happen off screen. We don't get to see it. So, and I don't know what that is. I don't have any answers for you. Don't expect that from me. But I just noticed that this is just that the point is just to focus on the negative. And I'm not sure what it's trying to say. I'm not sure why it's saying what it's saying. I don't know if there's a grander meaning to any of this. It was I don't even know. And this all brings me around to my rating, because I always rate the things I've read. I have never not rated something that I've read. And in this case, I will not rate this one because I just don't know how. I don't know what rating to put on it, if I'm being honest. If I were to rate it on an enjoyability factor, how much did you enjoy reading this? It'd be like a -15. It would be so far in the gutter, I didn't enjoy a single fucking page of it. It was awful. If I were to rate it on an affecting level, if I were to rate it on how affecting it is, like just viscerally and emotionally, it would be a 10. How do I reconcile those two things in my mind? I haven't fully wrestled with that idea yet. Also, people like to call this a masterpiece, and I don't know if it's that. It is exceptionally well done. It is exceptionally well written in what it does and how affecting it is to the reader as you read it. But in order for it to be, even though it's completely unenjoyable, in order for it to be a masterpiece, I would feel like it probably should have a underlying moral or theme or some greater thing that it's supposed to be doing or saying, and I don't know if there is. If there is, I haven't figured out what it is. And to be honest, maybe it doesn't need that. Maybe it doesn't need to be some grand statement of anything. Let's just be fair. Maybe it just needs to mean something to the reader. Fuck me, I don't know. What I do know is I don't feel comfortable assigning this one a number. I cannot say that I'm happy that I read it, but I can say that I will never forget it. Whatever that's worth. As always, everybody, the link for my Patreon's in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.